It's my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Peter Manel. In just a moment, Professor Manel will share with us some ideas about exploring the interplay between intellectual property and social justice. Professor Manel is the Koret Professor of Law at the University of California at the Berkeley School of Law, as well as a co-founder and co-director of the Berkeley Center for Law and Technology. Professor Manel earned his JD from Harvard Law School, his PhD in economics from Stanford University. He also has earned an MA from Stanford University and an SB from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He has advised Congress, federal agencies, as well as major technology and entertainment companies on a wide range of intellectual property and antitrust matters. He has also served as one of the inaugural Thomas Alva Edison visiting professionals at the USPTO and is vice chair of the National Academies of Sciences project on copyright and innovation. Professor Manel's work has had a deep impact on me. For one, he co-authored the property textbook that I used when I was in law school. I've cited to many of his articles in my own work throughout my career as an academic. And most recently, I read an article that he authored on intellectual property and social justice. And the day after I read that article, I called him and asked him if we would come and share some of the ideas in the article with this audience. And I'm very happy that he agreed to do so. So please join me in welcoming Professor Peter Manel.
Well, thank you, Keith. This is a real honor to be here. This is such a special subject for me and the speakers you've heard. This is something about which we have tremendous passion. And I sort of backed into this area a bit in the sense that even though I've come to realize that all intellectual property scholars are social justice scholars, I hadn't emphasized that, but I was asked to give a presentation about a property scholar, Joseph Singer, who had really made as the hallmark of his research social justice and property. And I was asked to bring in sort of an intellectual property dimension there, and I just realized that we really are in that business. When I started in IP, actually my early work was in environmental law, but I was really in love with computers. And so I learned about IP just because you had to in the early computer days, and I wrote about those topics. But I later came to see that we're really dealing with the most important issues in society. Technology drives, if we're going to survive as a species and a planet, it's going to be because we are able to promote innovation, creativity. We're able to build bridges, both culturally and technologically. So what I'm going to do is take you on a tour today. I will provide some mapping. But as you might guess, this is a very hard area to map. It's not two-dimensional, it's multi-dimensional, and it's inherently personal. You've heard from each of the speakers today some personal stories, and so, it's impossible to avoid that. Social justice issues abound in IP law and policy. They're both small and large, they're local and global, they're heterogeneous. So what I hope I can do while you're enjoying your lunch is to keep you engaged, provide some examples, to trace out some of the ecosystems that surround these issues. And I find them every day in my life. There's never a day that goes by that I'm not dealing with IP at some sort of very direct level. And I find that's true for my students. When you listen to music, enjoying mashup, all of these issues have come together. In fact, my exposure to mashup, which I'll get to a little later, was when my older son got to college and he had heard Girl Talk, Greg Gillis, one of the sort of real pioneers in kind of this new mashup genre. And since he grew up around copyright law in our household, he immediately emailed me and said, this can't be legal, can it? Now, it wasn't going to affect whether he listened to it, but I thought it was great that he recognized the issue, and it's caused me, great, it's been a real challenge to try to fit this in. So you'll see that I'm very passionate about the issues, but I'm often passionate in a somewhat ambivalent way, because I see justice issues on both sides. And you already saw that this morning. I thought the panel on trademark law was riveting. I mean, such really strong and effective arguments on both sides. Certainly when we get into the copyright issues, you'll find that, and patent as well. So, and then I'm gonna augment Lateef's comment about law review articles when I get to trade secrets. So I'll just put that, I won't spoil that. All right, so the first map that we'll begin with is the one that I start my IP class with. I try to explain to my students where IP fits into the conventional buckets. And as you know, in almost every law school in the United States, among the 3 required first-year courses are property, contracts, and torts. And as an economist, so when trained as an economist, I've come to believe that this makes some sense. It's logical, given that we're an exchange economy. And without these 3 basic structures, you can't have commerce, you can't have capitalism. That we've built our economy, and what a lot of lawyers work around are these concepts. And we can build IP sort of from those principles. Property is the foundation for exchange. Contracts allow you to transact. Torts bring in the protection of other members of society, third parties. In trademark law, we bring in consumers. We protect consumers from being fooled in the marketplace. Trade secrets have this commercial morality quality. We've got state unfair competition laws, and the right of publicity is sort of a variant on trademark protection as well. And then antitrust law is kind of a backdrop. And so there are a lot of moral, and I'll say social issues already embedded in our property, contract, tort, IP system. But as we've talked about today, it's not really adequate, that there are other sort of constitutional, human, and social issues that go beyond what our traditional hardware has prepared us for. But I do want to start with this foundational set of ideas. We need to build up. Why IP? Well, the Constitution empowered Congress to create these rights. And this was one of the first set of laws that Congress created. In 1790, we get the Patent Act and the Copyright Act, and George Washington gives an eloquent speech saying that these are the foundations of a just society. So we find those notions really in the fabric of this country from the very beginning. And the way they work is like bait. The idea is to attract inventors as well as investors. And in Silicon Valley, we talk mostly about venture capital. But that's the basic idea, that we're using a private market-based system, that we're going to create these incentives for people to invest and to put in the hard work to invent. On the copyright side, we've got Hollywood as the venture capitalists, principally. And we have, these people who come out of nowhere. J.K. Rowling. She was not destined for greatness. She didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge. She's the greatest author in human history. Why? Copyright law. Copyright. And is she a great person? In my family, she's the greatest. She brought my kids to literacy better than anyone imaginable. And, that's this thing of beauty. And when we get into my story of IP and social justice, you'll see that I couldn't be here without great creators, great inspirers. George Lucas, one of our local heroes from Northern California, he was, just a kid at USC, comes up with a great movie. Next thing you know, he's reinventing the entire industry, and we get the Star Wars movies. Now, trademark brings in a whole other dimension. We call it intellectual property because we do create these intangible rights, but it's a very different flavor of intellectual property. It's really about consumers, it's about the market, it's about trying to enable people to find what they expect in a marketplace. And so I want to be careful not to try to sort of push all of IP into one bucket. It's a very variegated landscape to begin with. Okay, so now we get to sort of the opening concept here that we have to we have to get a grip on. So I brought in these word clouds for intellectual property and social justice, and I've tried to extract what for me really stand out from these concepts. So with intellectual property, particularly patent, copyright, and to some extent trade secrets, we're about promoting progress, innovation, creativity. We use these property concepts and the notion of exclusivity. Trademark law brings in the integrity of the market. Trade secret law adds in some commercial morality concepts. Social justice, I think, does overlap in interesting ways. Promoting progress is going to be very important to providing people with the basic necessities. I mean, go back 100, 200 years, I mean, people lived pretty badly. And because of innovation, we've brought many people into much more dignified and much more, they're able to live longer, et cetera. But there are many, many other concepts that we draw into social justice. I've listed some of the major ones. They overlap in interesting ways. So we have distributive justice, equity, equality, dignity and respect, human, civil, economic rights, freedom, human flourishing. And that's something that I'm going to emphasize because I think that plays a really big role when we think about the cultural industries, and copyright and trademark are very important there. The notions of opportunity and inclusion, Latif emphasized those. And I also think that sort of general moral concepts of fairness come into play, partially in intellectual property, but definitely when we're talking about social justice. And then I put public health in there just because I think we can wrap that into a lot of the sort of basic human rights that many of us would think are important. And I'll pose one of the real puzzles that I struggle with. Let's say we could come up with a great cure for cancer. Society decides, and we now have this new cancer initiative. We outlawed cancer a long time ago, but it just doesn't seem to go away. So we now have this new moonshot project. But let's say we could get it, but it would cost so much that we would want to ration it based on price. And the intellectual property system has that character to it. When AZT was created, the people who found AZT wanted to ration it. They wanted to earn back the high venture risk that they took. And so would we, in a social justice IP context, might we say that we would rather not have certain cures, even though after 20 years they would become publicly available, if we couldn't make them available fairly widely? And I think that just highlights the issue. In some ways, that seems like a violation of a basic human right, that we would live in a society that would deny life-saving treatment. Well, in fact, we do this routinely without being aware of it. So these are very hard issues. There's, I think, some deep tensions as well as complementarities, and we'll try to work through some of those over the next the next 30, 40 minutes. So when I think about how we're going to achieve the constitutional objective, I'm not limited to intellectual property. In fact, the government regularly, and NASA we heard from this morning, the government regularly funds research directly. And that's a successful way of getting to the moon and certain other kinds of things, but it has certain limitations. It requires government officials to make judgments. And as we heard from the trademark discussion today, that may not be a perfect system. The difference between some of the words that were discussed, I didn't really think are capable of government decision making. So that's one system that we have. It relies on a political allocation mechanism. Another way that we tend to do this is through prizes. And so at my university, the highest award that you can get, or the most valuable resource that we allocate, is a parking spot. And the way in which you get a guaranteed parking spot, you win a Nobel Prize. And so when you walk around the Berkeley campus, you will find parking slots that say NL, Nobel Laureate. So when you bring home the Nobel Prize, you get, and unfortunately there are no Nobel Prizes in law, so I'm never going to have a parking spot. So no, but seriously, I mean, for many of my colleagues in the sciences, this is what drives them, and that's a great thing, and we should be glad, but we still need money, and a lot of the buildings on our campus have the names of companies and donors. So this is a system that's based on sort of a meritocracy, but it tends to be fairly focused. What does intellectual property bring to this menu? Well, it creates a form of artificial exclusion. It essentially takes something which would be ordinarily free. I can share ideas without depleting my enjoyment of that idea, unlike physical resources. But in order to encourage people to develop these inventions, we allow them to exclude others for a limited time. And how do we pick those? Well, there's somewhat of a prize system. You have to meet the standards of novelty, non-obviousness, et cetera. Copyright, kind of a low standard, originality. And then we value the prize with the market. That's a really remarkable institution, that we allow the capitalist system to put the price, and that encourages people to try to put their ideas out into the world, to be inventive in the marketing of those ideas, in the building of businesses around it. And there are great stories surrounding our world. And in fact, there are many great inventors who never succeeded because they weren't good business people. And there are many great business people who've teamed with inventors. And that's sort of the menu set that we have. And we've had all three really from the beginning of the country, but certainly intellectual property from the very beginning. One of my favorite stories, I won't be able to regale you in it today, is of Chester Carlson, a frustrated patent attorney who had gone to Caltech, a very smart guy, but he had trouble writing. He became a patent agent. He had trouble writing the applications because he had poor eyesight. He said there has to be a better way to create copies, because the only technologies available at the time were blueprint paper and carbon paper. And it was very hard for him to manipulate and create patent applications. And he figured out that you could use some physical properties, the fact that light is that electrostatic fields are sensitive to light, and he creates a technology. It takes him decades, but eventually the Xerox Corporation. Most of my students have never heard of Xerox, or it's just a minor company today, but it was a very, very important company for decades. And I'm going to suggest to you, I won't go into all of it, that it may have been the most important company of the 20th century. Why do I say that? Because they made so much profit that the Xerox Corporation opened the Palo Alto Research Center. It's in the foothills behind Stanford University. And what did they invent there? And ironically, a company that was so patent-centric did not use patents for a lot of the Palo Alto Research Center work. And what did they invent? Well, they invented the personal computer. They invented the graphical user interface. This is what Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak saw when they were developing the Macintosh, and they copied it because it was not protected. They also invented the internet. It was called the Ethernet, but it was essentially the basic sort of local area network technology that the internet grew out of. So what we see here is both patents serving a very kind of proprietary. Xerox was built on patents. They fought for their patents. They sued and won a lot of cases. But eventually that profit became a public resource and has given us far more and far greater. And that's a story that we see throughout. For example, Bill Gates, the wealthiest man in the world, has committed a large portion of his wealth, as did Alfred Nobel, to the public good. And just this week, Priscilla Chan and Mark Zuckerberg made the largest philanthropic gift in public health history, $3 billion. And so there's going to be a new consortium. Our university and Stanford and UCSF are going to be trying to cure all diseases within their children's lifetimes. So it's a complicated structure. I don't think of intellectual property as really isolated, but it's part of a very interesting mosaic of institutions. The other complicated part about IP is that rarely are inventions standalone. Very few examples, like the ballpoint pen, has never been improved upon. But most technologies are cumulative, that we build cumulatively, and almost all great technologies require secondary, tertiary. And so if we create rights that are too strict, we lose some of that or we delay some of that cumulative, unless we can get licensing, but that's complicated too. So we need to create very, I think, subtle distinctions in our law in order to encourage a balance between primary or pioneering inventors and those who build on those works. So let's take a little interlude here. As long as we're talking about cumulative innovation, this was brought up by our earlier panel. Let's see. Might need a little more sound here. Let's see if we got it.
I've got some news for you. My shot, now lie.
There's no one that will do it like I do it.
Hash it up,
Perfectly together.
now lie. My shot, now lie.
Bring your body and let me switch up your atmosphere.
I'm about to let you see. This is what'll happen if you
Hash it up.
So that was by the individual by the name of Norwegian Recycling. And he took a lot of compositions and sound recordings and put them together in what is a very pleasant, enjoyable piece. Now, if he had to go out and license all those rights, you probably would have never seen that, because a lot of those artists aren't that anxious to enter into those deals. And I'll just say that that's one of the challenges that we have. How do we encourage, how do we allow this? And I'm going to suggest there may be some solutions, but we're going to have to play that one out. But before I get there, I want to kind of suggest a second map. So this is a map that tries to connect at sort of a micro level the larger social justice world with the intellectual property world. So I've represented creators and cumulative creators on one side, the society at large, and essentially we have these intermediaries, record labels, book publishers, motion picture studios. They are the intermediaries. They sort of allow things to flow. And there can be tensions between those institutions, as we heard this morning, and the creators themselves, and between the society at large, the consumers of these works. But when this works in an ideal way, we can get a fairly good equilibrium. We can get a balance in which the market is setting prices and in which people are only paying for things that they value more than their cost, and that's a pretty good principle. At least that's how most of our economy works. Now, there's some other complications in that we need to have fairly good communication between creators and cumulative creators, and that can be very complicated as well. And so trying to sort of work out all of the tensions that can arise in that relationship. So let me sort of work through some of these issues, and we'll begin with this idea of promoting progress. I think this is an area where there's complementary between IP and social justice. And I'll use as my example, my poster child, Gordon Moore. Gordon Moore was an engineer at Intel. A little over 50 years ago, he saw the future. He predicted that the number of semiconductor processors you can fit on a semiconductor chip would double every 18 months to 2 years. It became known as Moore's Law, and it has actually continued in force for 50 years. In fact, we recently celebrated the 50th anniversary. And what this has enabled us to do as a people, as a society, is really astounding. Intel's latest chip offers 3,500 times more performance, is 90,000 times more energy efficient, and about 60,000 times lower in cost than what they were able to do 50 years ago. Now, if a 1971 VW Beetle advanced at this rate, you could go 300,000 miles per hour, getting 2 million miles per gallon of gas for 4 cents. So it's hard to really argue, and Intel, has been around all of this time. They have relied heavily on the patent system. They could not have attracted all of this investment without it. And so, I have a hard time saying, patents aren't a good system. I mean, how could you dispute, that kind of evidence? And, these are major institutions that have been built up around this model. Okay, well, we have some big problems out there. And, I would say every part of the country is feeling some sort of effects of climate change at this point, and there's really no doubt, apart from certain political contenders, that this is something that will, I think, really have tremendous, probably, or certainly adverse consequences for many people on the planet. And really, it relates to a central problem, which is how we get energy. And energy has been a problem for a very long time. In fact, most of the geopolitical problems relate to energy as well. Thomas Friedman wrote very eloquently about this in his book, Hot, Flat, and Crowded. The one problem I have with this book is that it doesn't talk about intellectual property. And I think to really solve the problems that we're facing, we're going to need something on the order of Moore's Law. And we're getting very close. If you look at the cost per kilowatt hour of solar or wind, it has come down dramatically. Now, in parts of the country, it may actually be more competitive than other sources, but I think within the next decade or so, it will be the best source of energy for many uses. Now, it doesn't immediately solve a problem, because when you have countries like Saudi Arabia that are sitting on vast remaining resources, at which the only cost of them is getting it out of the ground, they're going to dump that oil, and we're going to burn it somewhere in the world, and we're going to risk. So we have very hard policy choices here, and this is something that has worried me. As I said, environmental law was sort of my first area of study. But I'm encouraged, and I think that intellectual property and the kind of investments that we're seeing are going to make that difference. It's hard to know, because intellectual property is about the unknown. But I do see the foundation for a whole new economy, but it's complicated, and intellectual property is a part of that. One of the most exciting parts of our neck of the world, the East Bay, is in Fremont, California. We have the Tesla plant, and now near Lake Tahoe, we have the Gigafactory. And when you think about the whole energy story, this is going to be critical, because the challenge for solar and wind is intermittency. And if we can create more efficient storage, that will allow us to kind of get the seamless reliability that we all demand. Now, this is an area, as I said, really connects a lot of the dots. But there's one other piece that I'm going to mention here today, because it's one of the most significant encounters I've had in my professional life, but also one of the saddest. About 5 years ago, I got an email from a young woman who was starting her career teaching here. Her name is Sarah Tran, and she noticed that I did work in both intellectual property and environmental law. And she emailed me, she said, "I heard you do both these. I'm going to be in the Bay Area. Can I take you to lunch?" And I said, "No, I'm going to take you to lunch." And we had this wonderful meeting, and she told me about, how she was an engineer in the Peace Corps, did a lot of really interesting things, worked at the patent office, was writing about green technology, and so I had been invited to do an edited book on, initially it was going to be called Intellectual Property in the Environment. I decided we needed to expand that to include innovation. And I was debating, because these publishers charge way too much money, and they're really just bilking libraries. But I realized, there's a need to really plant some seeds in this area. And Sarah didn't know about some of the classic articles that I had grown up on, and I said, let's work together. We'll put together the best list of pieces and put it out there. And we did that. And the sad part of the story is that she passed away just as the book became available. But she was based here, and I will forever remember her. She was remarkably courageous and inspirational, and I just think that what she was interested in really is the future, and that's what I hope this whole venture will be. So let's take this another step further. Let's think about some of the equity and equality issues surrounding IP. So Thomas Jefferson recognized that IP, like other sort of public goods, like the light of a taper, are not by their nature exclusive. And therefore, we would want to share them because they don't deplete other people's use of those resources. And light is such a great metaphor for knowledge. And I contrast that to an ice cream cone, which is the ultimate private good. You don't want to share that. And so I begin my IP class by explaining to students that IP is just a totally fake thing. Ideas want to be free, but we don't want to make them free if we want to encourage people to invest in them. And so that's the tension that we have. Once we have it, we do want to share it. But then that sends a signal to the next inventor, don't bother, because we're not going to pay you for it. And so we have to try to balance those things, but we want it to be done in a way that's fair. Fairness is a very important concept in so much of what we do, and if the intellectual property system was producing tremendous unfairness, that I think would undermine its legitimacy. So let's talk about some of those issues. So, as I said at the very beginning, this idea of access to medicine. We use the intellectual property. In fact, the pharmaceutical industry has been one of the most successful intellectual property stories because we need a lot of investment. There's tremendous risk. And so we've been able to cure a lot of very difficult problems, diseases, through this mechanism, but we still face that very difficult problem of providing access. And so I've come to believe that I can't teach patent law in good conscience without teaching some public health law and trying to get students to think about, affordable care and things like that. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. We have a panel later today that's going to talk about that. But that, I think, is just, one of the most pressing challenges that we have in both the IP and social justice areas. Now, we've all heard about how, the price of the EpiPen, which is a very essential medicine for a lot of people today, that will save lives, has been skyrocketing. And, it gives a black eye to the IP system. It's harder for me to walk into my class when, I have to say that, oh yeah, that's what you get with exclusive rights. And what we're seeing is in some ways an interesting backlash, and I think we're getting into this interesting new era in which we have sort of social advocacy around these sorts of issues. I don't want to throw out the IP system and certainly the patent system, but I also think that we're bringing in some of these other dimensions, and I think that will perhaps discourage some innovation where you can't charge through the roof, but I also think that I don't necessarily want to live in a society that doesn't provide that kind of access. So one of the problems that Sarah and I are experiencing is that our book is basically unaffordable. And I encounter people who say, hey, can I get a copy? And they don't even make them available to me at a low price. So that's part of the ecosystem that we live in, that publishers, universities, professors, we don't have a very good way of working this out. So let me illustrate that a little more directly with regards to another book that I have. This is a case book on intellectual property. It was sold by the leading publisher, Wolters Kluwer, and we were doing quite well. And then 2 years ago, the publisher, we were ready for the 7th edition. We wrote to the publisher, said, when do you need it by? It was around September 15th. And they said, oh, you've already missed the deadline. We needed the manuscript by September 1st for the following summer. And we pretty much send them a camera-ready version. I mean, they don't really do anything. And I was like, that's ridiculous. We got into an argument. And we pulled out our contract, which was from a prior publisher who they had acquired, and it turns out we owned the copyright. So instead of charging $225 for the casebook and $50 for the supplement, this summer I began a new publishing company. It's called Clause 8. I hope some of you can recognize why. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8. And we now self-publish these books, and the prices come down a bit. I had to break it up into 2 volumes because under CreateSpace you can only fit so many. But we got the prices down. That's for the print copy, and you can also get them on Kindle for $9.99. So we've knocked 80 to 90% off the prices. The book is better because we put more effort in, and I just think it highlights just the kind of dysfunction that you can get. I mean, most professors don't even know how much the books that they assign cost. It turns out they cost about $10 or $15 to manufacture. My co-authors and I are earning the exact same royalty we did on the $225 book. We were making $15 for the red book. We make $7.50 on each of these. And it just seems to me that we need to have that sort of moral, social justice brought it into how we, because our students are paying through the nose for all kinds of things. And this is the kind of change that is possible in the new environment. We couldn't have done this. We never imagined when we first signed our contract that we would be publishers. But in today's world, thanks to the internet, all things can happen. All right, so let me tell you another fairness story. This is a band, some of you may have heard of it. It's one of my favorite bands called Zox. I knew the father of the lead songwriter. And this band was performing in New England about 8 years ago. It was a little more than, maybe about 10 years ago. So right after sort of Napster kind of hit, and they were filling clubs all over the place. They were doing really well. They had a very passionate base. Their albums, they were sort of doing these kind of indie label, but Eli's voice was compared to Bono. And I really loved their music. Just brilliant writing, really great performance qualities. And I could see that they were, they'd done their own videos, they were on YouTube, and yet no one was buying their records. And you kind of know why, because all their music was available for free. And I would go through and see what people were saying about them on YouTube, and hear, best ever, best music video ever. And I was struck when I was going down this list, and I saw this one comment: "Does anyone have the MP3?" And I thought, what kind of fan would say to other fans, "Hey, can you help me rip off the band that we're all celebrating?" I just thought, this makes no sense to me. And I realized that the moral component of our music industry had been lost on the most important, one of the most important constituencies, the fans. And, I also realized our neighbor in Berkeley, Chris Anderson, the editor of Wired Magazine, this idea of free had kind of spread on the internet. Everything's free, Google's free, Facebook's free, why not music? And then I met Scotty Azeri. So I'll play this for you. I think this is, this captured for me what no one else had put out there.
Dude, awesome show.
Thanks very much.
So, how much for your CD?
It's $6.
Dude, $6? Brah, come on.
Dude, it's $6.
Brah, Radiohead gave their album away for free.
Do I look like fucking Radiohead to you?
Okay, calm down. Here's your $6, Jesus. Hey, I got a buddy who'd be into this. Do you mind if I burn him a copy?
Kinda.
Seriously?
Kinda, yeah, but what am I gonna do about it?
That's right, what are you gonna do about it?
I mean, I'd rather that anyone that wants to listen to it get a copy, but...
But what?
I mean, okay, it cost me $3 to burn the CD and print out a label and put it in a case. And then, I wrote the songs and played all the instruments and recorded the music and spent many a Saturday night hunched over my laptop getting the EQ on the ukulele just right instead of having sex with my fiance. So I figure that's worth about $3 too.
But Chris Anderson and Wired said the future of music is free and you can make a living by touring and giving away your music online.
Chris Anderson can bite my tiny, tattooed, half-Jap ass. You tell Chris Anderson to give his books away for free and make his money playing in shitty clubs in Provo, Utah, where the $4 cover goes straight to the bar, and the only way to make gas money to the next town is if some drunk picks up a copy of the CD.
Hang on, it says Creative Commons on the back. So, doesn't that mean I can give this away for free?
No, You're awfully well informed for a drunk frat guy in a bar.
I was a hipster my freshman year of college.
Got it.
Okay, but what about this recent article by Kevin Kelly that Cory Doctorow put up on Boing Boing that said for an artist to make a living in the 21st
Look, just
century,
take
they
the
only
CD,
need one?
take it. Don't worry about it, just take it. I hope you like it. Burn copies for your friends, put it up on BitTorrent. It's fine. It's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. And you out there on the internet, you want a CD? You email me. Email idon'thavesix@gmail.com with the subject line, Chris Anderson said you'd give me free shit, and I'll send you the goddamn CD.
All right, so beautiful. I mean, because, I shouldn't pay $20 for a CD for only one song that I like, but I shouldn't pay $0 either. There's something in between. There's this notion of fairness that we all recognize that has been completely lost on people who've grown up in the internet era. Because Google gives everything away for free. Facebook gives everything away. Well, as we'll see, it's not actually free, but we'll get into that in a minute. Then there's the other side of the artist world. And this is a case that I ended up working on. I'm very proud of this just because it needed to get fixed. And it was a really hard problem. So I was contacted by a guy named Joel Martin, who was the head of FBT Productions. You probably never heard of them. It's called the Funky Bass Team. That's what FBT stands for. And the Bass Brothers had discovered Eminem and developed his early recordings. And it turns out that he became the biggest act of the first decade of this millennium. And when they did the accounting, they saw that they were not getting paid for the iTunes based on what the contract said, because any first-year student could read the contract, and it says on masters licensed by us to others for manufacture and sale of records or for any other uses, you get 50%. And they were only getting, the 18% for records sold. And so when they called me up, I said, you don't need me. This is so easy, anyone could do it. And they said, oh no, Universal's going to the mat on this. And the reason is because after Napster, they quickly did a deal with Steve Jobs, and they agreed that he could have all their music. Well, they claimed it was not licensed, that it was sold. But obviously it's licensed. It's not like they're sending a new copy every time you download from iTunes. So we got into this very big case. It was long drawn out. We eventually got a Ninth Circuit victory, but it just taught me that the people who the copyright system is trying to motivate are really in a tough situation. They're being squeezed on both sides. Their fans don't want to pay, the record companies don't want to share, so in the end it's kind of ugly. And then we have these other folks in the system. We've met Norwegian Recycling. This is Greg Gillis, or Girl Talk, and you heard a little music earlier. I'll play some of mine. Greg Gillis is not quite in the sweet Norwegian Recycling mode. But we'll see how many of you recognize, for me, it's not Stairway to Heaven, but I'll say I consider Stairway to Heaven the greatest, or one of the 2 or 3 greatest rock and rolls. There's another one that some of you will hear in this, but you got to listen carefully. It's called Down for the Count. The younger people may know this. Got it? You got it?
We got 'em going down, but it just serves to be.
So this is sort of taking a rap hip-hop song and then building on top of maybe the greatest rock and roll song. So, like Stairway to Heaven, a long song, opening part. This is the opening great riff, and then the second part of the song is a beautiful piano. It's heaven. And so Lateef, you win the award, named that song, and you can see what this Greg Gillis did here. Kind of changed the tempo a little, lined it up, and I think it's a beautiful combination. So what do you do with that?
We got 'em going down, but it just serves to be from Decatur.
Okay, so let's do another one. This one's not going to be so hard. Let's see, did I get the right one? Yeah. This is kind of an easy one. My wife got it.
Drop it low, girl. Drop it low, girl. Drop it low, girl.
So that took about a second. I think less than a second. We got it right here. Now, my wife and I, we were going to visit our son down in Los Angeles. It's kind of a long ride. And I just decided, let's just do Girl Talk the entire way. This will just be a kick. And we loved it because the music just takes you in every direction. It's kind of crazy and obscene and amusing. And then this one came on. I have to say, I'm not that knowledgeable of Beyonce. I had heard this song. But there's a 1.5 minute segment of Single Ladies. And there's pretty much nothing on top of it. And my feeling, this was what my older son had emailed me about. He said, is that legal? And I would say, I would have a hard time advising that that's fair use. I mean, it's really the heart of that song. And so it raises this tough question. What do we do about these new artists? Every generation wants to create itself. I mean, hip hop, rap, it grew out of the generations that follow, all the rock and roll grew out of the R&B. So we want to allow that to happen, and it is happening. The internet allows it, and in fact, you could perform this stuff live without violating any copyright law. That we allow public performance. So these DJs are making a fortune in Las Vegas and Ibiza. So there is a very successful genre, but it's frustrating for me that it's not available on Spotify, although perhaps maybe soon. It's mostly on a place called SoundCloud, which has been in kind of limbo for a while. And there's been a really big debate. We heard it this morning. Is this stuff fair use? And I think it's very complicated. It's impossible to figure out because we're talking about hundreds of samples in some of these kinds of songs. And we would never have enough experts to resolve all those disputes. I've got caught in the middle because on one side there's the copy left side who they just want to make everything free, and then on the copyright side I'm going up against Steven Tyler and the RIAA who thinks that it's all property, and I've taken kind of a middle position here. I say let's just do like we did before.
There must be some kind of way out of here.
Find a way out of here.
Say that joker to the thief.
So another of the greatest rock and roll
There's too
songs
much
of all time.
confusion. I can't get no relief.
So who wrote that? Bob Dylan. Yeah. So Bob Dylan wrote that. Did Jimi Hendrix get a license? I don't think so. I think Bob Dylan would have given him a license, but he didn't need one. There's a cover license. He could do that. And when you watch The Voice, all of that stuff is under the cover license. This is a really good system. In IP, transaction costs are a big problem. And it strikes me that the best way to solve even the remix problem is a compulsory license. Let's just let computers figure out what's in there, just divide it up. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I've been pushing this. I went to the Copyright Office and to the Commerce Department studies, and I'm the only person in the room, except for all the young people in the audience, who thinks this is a good idea. But the copy left, the copyright, they're all opposed. I think it would be fantastic because we could make better mashups, because then recording the record labels would have an incentive to push their stuff out into that world. And what you really want is to have what are called the stems. What you want to have are sort of the original tracks. You don't want to have to use karaoke tracks. And I just think this is where we are today in the evolution of music, and copyright should not stand in the way of that. Now, I'm fighting. There are a lot of objections. I've got Steven Tyler, the moral rights people, and I agree. I wouldn't want to have my songs made fun of, but we live in a First Amendment world. We have free speech. I can't tell you exactly what the value of each and every song element is, but we've always had the compulsory license, which is based on just one uniform rate, and it's worked pretty well. Now, I do deal with, the people who say, this would be a real offense, but I could do a cover in a really offensive way, and that would be completely legal. I just can't do a mashup. We have lots of sort of issues, but I think at the end of the day, we would be much better off in a world where lawyers were not needed to create mashups. And I know some of you would lose a little business, but I do think it would be better for the artists and for the fans. All right, so that's that solution. Let's talk about some other issues: dignity, respect, human flourishing. And I want to introduce you to someone who you weren't expecting today. It's 17-year-old me. And why? Because, as I said at the beginning, I wouldn't be here today without the artists and the creators that have influenced me. And who would those be? Well, Pete Townsend. He's at the top of it.
Teenage wasteland. It's only a teenage wasteland. Teenage wasteland. Oh, yeah.
So as a teenage misfit, I couldn't have survived without the themes of quadrophenia, without all of the sort of undercurrents that come. And then who's the other major influence on me? And my parents were important, but not as important as the next person. background on Gene Roddenberry. This clip will tell you all you need to know. I was growing up, in a suburb of New Jersey. Oops, I don't want to get there yet. Gene Roddenberry was developing a show that was ostensibly based on space travel, but in fact Star Trek was so much more, and I would say I could not possibly be who I am without his influence, because I grew up in a fairly homogeneous, my grandparents were immigrants, they lived in a little sort of ghetto, and then my parents, got this starter home, and everyone was sort of the same, but I came to see the world through this lens. Oops.
Irwin Allen's formulaic Monster of the Week shows got good ratings for both CBS and ABC. Executives at NBC wanted the same for their science fiction show, Star Trek. But creator Gene Roddenberry wasn't interested in adding more monsters. He saw Star Trek as a vehicle to influence social change. And in 1960s America, few topics seemed more important than racial equality and women's rights, issues that TV ignored. But Gene Roddenberry wasn't afraid. For 2 decades, African-American women were allowed only one role on television.
It ought to.
The servant.
Sergeant, I didn't know what...
Lieutenant Uhura, take over navigation.
The breakthrough came when Nichelle Nichols was cast as Lieutenant Uhura, 4th in command on the Starship Enterprise. But Uhura was soon written out of storylines as other characters became more dominant. Frustrated, Nichols wrote a letter of resignation. Within hours, a certain dedicated fan requested a special meeting.
And I stood up to turn around and meet the Trekkie. And there is this man, bigger than life human being, Dr. Martin Luther King. He says, I'm the Trekkie. He says, I'm the biggest Trekkie on the planet, and I am Lieutenant Uhura's most ardent fan. He went on to say how important Star Trek was, that images on television permeate the culture, either for the good or for the bad, and this is for the highest good. He said, you cannot abdicate your position. You are changing the minds of people across the world, because for the first time, through you, we see ourselves, what can be, what we are fighting for, what we are marching for.
Nichols returned to Star Trek.
Captain.
A singular role model for thousands of Americans who had never before seen a woman of color in a position of power.
Transport.
So it's pretty remarkable to know that, as this adolescent in New Jersey, I was in some ways connected, at least intellectually, with Martin Luther King. This was one of the shows that he allowed his daughters to watch because it made this very important message. And, I learned a lot about the world through those kind of sources, that the media does form who we are, sometimes in ways that may not be so good, but in many ways, these television productions, or here, my favorite basketball player of all time, who my older son wanted to be when he grew up. I mean, for adolescent white youth to want to be Mike is saying a lot about, the society we live in. Now, unfortunately, he had my genetic makeup, so he's never going to be like Mike. But I think that we have to, when we think about the copyright system, think about it in these ways. There's certainly a lot of stuff that doesn't deserve that treatment, but we through these industries have those effects. And it continues to this day. I mean, every month or 2 months, there's a movie, there's a television series that opens up my eyes. It allows me to stand, and because these industries attract capital, attract talent, we get to understand the world and different perspectives so much better. So in the last decade, we've seen a remarkable shift in views on gay rights. In fact, you might remember that President Obama was not in favor of gay marriage when he took the first oath of office. And yet today we live in a world that's completely different. Now, one can say that it was great lawyers, and I credit Bill Eskridge's great book on gay law, and David Boies, and the team that argued this case. But for me, the most important reason why we have these broader civil rights was will and grace. Will and grace. This was brought into the living rooms throughout the country, and I think it had the most important impact. So when we think about the role of copyright, these are such important issues. Now, I'm not going to spend time on this issue, which we had a great panel on, but you can see how these issues of dignity, respect, are coming up throughout the IP system. And what we're seeing is the need to try to re-equilibrate some fundamental balances. We've had this kind of absolutist approach to freedom of expression. We also have equal protection issues. I'm not sure how this will play out, but this is now a central part of IP law in trying to sort these things out. So let me enter into another aspect. I've talked about copyright, patent issues. I want to get into some trademark issues and some other sort of connections. We all grew up with the Big Brother book, Orwell. Well, I came out with a story more recently. I call it 2014, Brand Totalitarianism. And it talks about a different type of Big Brother world in which we live. And it's a complicated story. It's not as simple as Big Brother. It's a story in which technology has allowed us to gain access to all of this great media. And for most of my life, it was really in the form of commercial interruptions. And whereas I think about Star Trek as the substance, people on Madison Avenue think of television programs as scheduled interruptions of marketing bulletins, because that's the reality of who pays for it. But at least in that era, the primary television era, there was demarcation between the show and the ad. But thanks to, and we all grew up being fed these horrible foods because we were addicted to, the ads conditioned us. Well, in today's world, with modern technology, we easily skip the ads, and that has produced this new equilibrium. And so now television companies have to figure out another way to pay the bills. And the way they do it is they pollute the content itself. So now, Captain Kirk would be drinking a futuristic Diet Coke or something. And, if you look at what's taught in the business schools and what's taught in entertainment programs, it's all about monetizing, how we get more of these third-party investors. And the reality is that we're polluting the minds of the most vulnerable people in our society, children, people who think that they're going to sort of make money in ways that are never going to pay off. And so we're paying a price. I think our public health has suffered. There are probably other reasons as well, but obesity rates, Morgan Spurlock has made fun of these kinds of things. In fact, one of his documentaries, he for 30 days ate only at McDonald's and supersized everything whenever they asked him to supersize, which they always did. And he put on 24.5 pounds, his cholesterol went through the roof. And, it was an amusing portrayal, but you have to think that we are affected when brands have sort of taken on this role. I mean, maybe they were all drinking Coca-Cola products, I don't know. Stephen Colbert captures it. He's a devout Catholic, but he's a more devout corporate whore. And, we laugh at this, but I tell you, over, at the business school here, this is what they're preaching. And it's not just television. This is how, Facebook and Google are getting paid. And if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. So we live in a very complex world in which IP and the whole sort of marketing, trademark, all of that are tied together. So now I want to turn to the other area that I promised, trade secrets. And here I'll tell a story that picks up on the Bob Brown Eye story. This one's a little more personal to me. So you may know who Jeff Wigand is. If you don't, I'll play you a little clip from one of my favorite movies.
What did you want to see me about? I don't like being back here.
Well, Jeffrey says exactly what's on his mind. Most people consider what they're saying, social skills. Jeffrey just charges right ahead. Now, I know you understood the nature of the confidentiality portion of your severance agreement with Brown and Williamson, Jeff.
Chapter and verse.
Yeah, I know you do. You know, I came up through sales. One of the reasons I was a great salesman was I never made a promise I couldn't keep. I knew that if I ever broke my promise, I'd suffer the consequence.
Is that a threat?
We worked together for, what was it, 3 years? Now, the work we did here is confidential, not for public scrutiny, any more than our one's family matters.
You're threatening my family now, too?
Now, don't be paranoid, Jeff. About the direction of research here, we may have had our differences of opinion.
Research? You declare as a badge of honor you don't even know what makes water boil.
Well, that's why we are hired scientists.
Okay. I don't believe you can maintain corporate integrity without confidentiality agreements. I was paid well for my work. The health and welfare benefits are good. The severance package is fair. I have no intention of violating my confidentiality agreement and disclosing that which I said I wouldn't.
Well, I appreciate all that, Jeff. But upon reflection, we've decided to expand our zone of comfort with you. So we've drafted a supplement to your agreement. It broadly defines and expands in more detail what is confidential. Nobody will be able to say, well, hell's bells, Margaret, I didn't know that was a secret. We're very serious about protecting our interests. We'd like you to sign it.
And if I don't?
If we arrive at the conclusion that you're acting in bad faith, we would terminate right now payouts under your severance package, you and your family's medical benefits, and initiate litigation against you, Mr. Wigand.
Dr. Wigand?
Dr. Wigand. After you've examined the document, you'll see it's in your own best interest, and you'll sign it.
So what you're saying is it isn't enough that you fired me for no good reason. Now you question my integrity? On top of the humiliation of being fired, you threaten me? You threaten my family? It never crossed my mind not to honor my agreement. I will tell you, Mr. Sandifer, and Brown and Williamson too, fuck me. Well, fuck you.
So this is a story that has really changed so much of our public health picture. So Jeffrey Wigand was a chief scientist at Brown and Williamson. He became aware that they were manipulating chemicals in cigarettes so as to promote addiction and to create other public health risks, but because he signed an agreement that almost every employee and every contractor signs as part of our general trade secret law, a non-disclosure agreement. That's how we maintain, that's how we can establish that we've met the precautions to get trade secret. He was prevented from disclosing the evil doings of a company. Now, who would think that trade secret law is there to essentially hide illegal conduct? I mean, I didn't think that was the law, but when I looked into it, it turns out that there's no clear public policy exception within the trade secret law. And so after sort of doing some background research, I gave as my final exam question a year ago last spring, I proposed a public policy exception, and I sort of said, here's what you ought to do. And my basic idea for this public policy exception was drawn somewhat on what we see in copyright and patent law. We have a variety of balancing rules. And so I wanted to see, could we get something like that to help whistleblowers who could reveal illegal activity. And certainly we're surrounded by people who are engaging in very dangerous activities, and often the people who blow the whistle don't come out very well. Certainly that was the risk for Wigand. In fact, it became a strategy within the defense bar to sue whistleblowers for violation of non-disclosure agreements. Even though they knew they wouldn't win, it would chill the whistleblowing activities. And so my idea was, let's draw from another of my favorite youth extract, the cone of silence. Now, if you remember, the cone of silence never worked, but my idea was that if you disclose to the government and to your attorney information that might or might not be trade secret, that you would be immune, because the government is bound under federal law and your attorney are bound by professional rules from disclosing that information. And so it seemed to me we could create a channel that would go directly to the government. I also proposed that NDAs have a clause that said that this does not apply to any illegal behavior so long as you disclose it through an appropriate channel. And lo and behold, the Defend Trade Secret Act was coming along. I got a call. This article went up on SSRN in early November. I got a call 2 days later from a Senate staffer who found the article, and she said, we want to do that. And Section 7 of the Defend Trade Secret Act is an immunity for whistleblowers with a notice provision. Within a week of the law coming out, you see client alerts from law firms saying, the new law requires employers to give notice of immunity rights. So this, I think, is a real social justice issue. Almost every major public health catastrophe, from asbestos to cigarettes to Volkswagen violating our pollution laws, are known inside companies. And the people who are living under the stress of that, having to be part of that illegal activity are now freed, and we as a society can benefit. So I think this is a really nice example of IP law moving into the social justice realm. Now, there are a whole bunch of other issues that I want to get to. I'm not going to be able to say much about them. I'll just sort of put them out there for future. So we're now entering into this era in which some people are doing really well and some people not so well. And IP is pretty much related to this because we've created this very powerful engine of profitability. We can use machines to do a lot of things that people used to do, and I think that is part of the story of, if you look, from the 1980s, basically software and other technologies are coming into the economy, and it's undoubtedly increasing the inequality. It's increasing the total profit, the total productivity, but it's also shifting it more towards people at the top. Similarly, we've got diversity issues. Now that the most important industries, both in terms of shaping who we are and in terms of profit, are much more, they require certain entrants, they require certain degrees, certain cultural backgrounds. We're seeing a loss of diversity, or at least a lack of diversity, in a lot of those industries. So science, technology, engineering, mathematics. We heard this morning from the PTO how important it is for them to get that message out, and I think it will be very important. I don't know quite how we do it. We saw with the Academy Awards this year that Hollywood is facing sort of similar complaints, and so we have, I think, just a whole set of issues surrounding global trade, all of these issues that really are IP social justice issues. So just to briefly summarize, here's my map. There are a bunch of sort of internal debates that we've long been talking about in law schools that form the core of the IP curriculum. But now I think we have to expand that map to look at more of the connections across the different constituencies, and then to look in a macro way at how technology is driving really most of our social policies and really beginning to connect more of those dots. I credit Latif and Steve and the other people who've been the pioneers in these areas, but I think we all are part of this debate. I think it empowers us as lawyers, as scholars, to really look at the most interesting and important questions. So thank you for your patience, and that's what I've got.